we're going to be working in the book. It's called The Code of Jewish Conduct. Okay, this is our book we'll be working with for a while. As you can see, it's by Rabbi Yitzchak Silver. Okay, The Code of Jewish Conduct, The Laws of Interpersonal Relationships, by Rabbi Yitzchak Silver. Okay, so this is a book that, forget about the workshop, it's a book that you want to own because it's worth owning. It's an important book. It's a book that belongs in everyone's home. So I'm sure I could arrange for it to be ordered. I could ask Rabbi Silver, or possibly somebody in the workshop could arrange it, which is much better than if I do it since they're more efficient. So what are we doing here? In all of our classes, we were talking about who am I and who is my soul and how do I connect. So the Torah tells you not only what to do, but how to do it. So the idea, and this is an idea we've spoken about many times, the stronger somebody is, the further their reach. So Hashem's will for goodness is so strong that it could reach all the way down to this world. So the purpose of this book is to teach you how to do it. How do you take the principles of connection and bring them to here, bring them to us? So today we're going to do the introduction and the very beginning. Okay, so the first thing you have to know is that all of these laws between man and fellow man are actual mitzvot. Okay, so we're starting to read from page 2. Okay, so that means it's not just a matter of being nice and being good. It's a matter of a mitzvah. So what that means, if there's a mitzvah means a commandment. It means that there's someone who gave the command. So a mitzvah is a bond between the one who gave the command, Hashem, and the one who's listening to it. So every one of these mitzvot between man and your fellow man doesn't only change your social relationships to other people or turn you into a person who's more connected, it changes your relationship with God. So, okay, these mitzvot are especially important now, more than they were even when the Torah was given. Now you could wonder how I could say that, how I could call a mitzvah important. So I want to tell you why. Okay, when Hashem knew what he was doing when he gave the Torah, many of the mitzvahs between man and God cannot be observed now. They require us to be at a whole different level of holiness. We need a temple, we need to be in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, the mitzvahs between man and fellow man, again, they reach so far, they come with such power, that you don't need the temple, you don't need Eretz Yisrael. All you need is yourself and another person. The mitzvahs have such enormous kedusha that they could be observed under any circumstance. So this is huge. Okay, and this also means that even people who've strayed from Torah in other regards, when they do these mitzvot, they're in tune with Hashem. Okay, but if you want this mitzvah to have its full power, it has to be part of a relationship. So the relationship isn't between you and another person, but between you and Hashem. He's the one who gave the commandment, and you're obeying the commander. This is bonding you. Now, the way all of these work is that shows you how to see Hashem in the other person and in yourself. So it's a very intimate bond. But if you want to have a relationship, it has to be two-sided. You have to bring Hashem into the picture. Okay. One of the differences between the mitzvot and being a good person, as people will say, is not only that it brings God into the picture, but it also is awfully specific. And I use the word awfully on purpose. We're going to be learning details. We're going to learn how to do it in a way that's analogous to how to bake a cake. If you were trying to make it's just an amazing recipe, I'm tempted to give it to you, but I won't. Okay, for biscotti. Okay, and it uses biscotti, in case you don't know, it's a bar, and then you cut it into sections, and you turn it so it toasts on both sides. So this biscotti uses cranberries and chocolate chips and all sorts of goodies. So suppose we say, well, just throw it in, flour, sugar, oil, what could be. You're not going to get the result. Every single aspect of each ingredient provides something that can't come randomly. Similarly, the mitzvahs between man and man are going to be detailed. They're going to be real. They're going to not be vague generalities like love your neighbor, be a good person. They're going to be specific. So the word how is going to be a very central word. Not just what, but how. Okay. Another thing that's important to know is when you know the mitzvahs in a vague sense, you often will assume your situation is unique and an exception, like I can't tolerate this or I shouldn't have to bear that. You have to know the laws. Now I want to promise you, and I could promise you this, 2 results that will definitely happen if you do it. Okay, so the first result is, to use Rabbi Silver's words, the joy of self-control. So I want to put it to you in Miriam Adahan's words. What she says many times is that every act of self-discipline is an act that builds self-esteem. When you know that you could do it, when you could say no to the part of yourself that's impulsive, that's destructive, that's negative, the actual act changes you. So I can guarantee you that you're going to be able to reach a point where there's simcha in your self-control. And there's another definite result. In the last prakim of our previous topic, for those of you who had listened to it, we were talking about peace. Peace is the whole picture. So in Hebrew, peace is about the dynamic of seeing the wholeness. So the interpersonal relationship being dismissive is the opposite of peace. Peace is dynamic. It's not just no war, that's passive. It's not just no aggression, that's passive. Peace is seeing the wholeness, seeing how every single person has a spiritual contribution to make. And the mitzvah will give you the tools to bring them forth. So this is what we're getting into. That was our introduction. Any questions about the introduction before we go straight into the meat? Any questions? I'll give you a minute. Especially about these 2 last points. Self-love and self-discipline, and peace. All clear? No questions? Ah, here one. Okay, so yes. So Diane recalled first peace, as we learned already, is shalom and shleimut. Can you repeat the peace concept? Yes. In the secular world, the concept of peace is passive, non-aggression, no war. In the Jewish concept of peace is dynamic, it moves. Means making things whole. Means proactively taking the pieces and putting each one in the right place. So you end up with the mosaic in which every single piece has a purpose, and you see it and you brought it to its place. So the mitzvot themselves tell you how to make peace. This is clearer now, Alice? It's clear? Okay. Okay, let's hope so. Okay, any other questions? Okay, Angela is happy. So peace equals harmony? Only sort of, because harmony could be something that was done by somebody else. For instance, you listen to a concert, and the conductor is making harmony. He's proactive, but you're passive. You're just listening. Peace is dynamic. These mitzvot demand something of you. The result will be harmony, but they make you an active participant in making harmony. Okay? Good? So Sophia said peace is balance. Very much so. Okay, so we're moving on to the first chapter, which is on page 7, if any of you happen to have the book. So the first mitzvah that's going to be discussed is in Hebrew, B'tzedek tishpot amitecha, which means judge your fellow person with righteousness. I'm going to show the book again, as somebody requested. One moment. Okay, see the code of Jewish conduct. Notice the blue cover. Let me do this right. Yeah, the blue cover by Rav Yitzchak Silver, and as you could see, it's published by Israel Bookshop. Okay, so notice it doesn't say judge your fellow favorably or well. It says what? With righteousness. So that means that judging somebody as you should requires you have a relationship to a trait called righteousness. What's righteousness? What do you think righteousness is? Let's hear what you have to say first. What do you think being righteous is? No definitions? Okay, so somebody said fine midos, right standing, fairness, we're getting closer. With favor, with positive thoughts of them, that's the outcome. But righteousness means truth, means seeing things as they are. Now, since we as humans don't have a strong handle on truth, okay, Tanya says with the midas ha'emes, with clarity, with right and wrong, all of this is true. Okay, so that means seeing Hashem's version of who this person is. Okay, so we're going to read our first paragraph, which to me is exciting. Judging your fellow is judging yourself. He gives us an example. The imposing marble walls compound your feelings of nervousness as you pace up and down the halls, waiting your turn to plead your case. True, it's only a $200 speeding ticket you have come to contest, but the atmosphere is full of tension. A young fellow rushing down the hall lands squarely on your toe, and to his mumble, "Excuse me," you respond, "Well, why don't you watch where you're going?" "I'm sorry," the young man retorts, "I didn't mean it. Do you think I did it on purpose?" "Well, if you would have been more careful, it wouldn't have happened." Moments after that unpleasant exchange, the door opens, and you're called in to stand before the judge. Humbly, you begin your plea. "I know I was traveling above the speed limit," but you have to understand, and the words get caught in your throat. As you look up and you see the judge glaring at you from his seat on the platform, sitting next to you is the young man you encountered. And the judge says, "This is my son." So there's no point in continuing. He's going to judge me as harshly as I judged his son, and rightly so. So that means every time you judge a fellow Jew, and you're trying to see, well, where does he fit in? And you're using the outside pressures of your life to determine what the answer to that question will be. That's how you're going to be judged. Okay, so that means, and it says this, it's an actual Gemara. It says whoever judges his fellow favorably will be judged favorably in Shamayim. So the reason isn't tit for tat or something juvenile. The reason is every deed we do draws down spiritual energy. So one of the spiritual energies that we learned about, for those of us who were in the previous webinar, is Gvura, is that there have to be challenges and limitations and boundaries. Everything has limitations, and we have to accept it. When we unnecessarily create limitations on the amount of truth or even the amount of compassion we're willing to feel, then this is our way of saying, I want to see people run in the fast track, and this is exactly how Hashem will judge you, because on some level you believe in that. So if you believe in it for someone else, you're going to be forced to seeing how this operates in terms of yourself. Okay, that's clear? So the basis of judging favorably is trying to find the way Hashem would see this person. Okay, that means you have to treat someone, to use the words of our organizer and presenter, B'Tselem Elokim, treating everyone in God's image. Okay, more. The Torah commands us to judge your fellow with righteousness, In its more limited application, the mitzvah is addressed to dayanim, to actual judges. And it refers to certain guidelines a judge has to follow. So, for instance, when an actual judge is judging a case and he has the accuser and the defendant, in fairness and in truth, they're both creatures of God. He has to treat them identically. You can't have one stand and one sit. Okay. So this mitzvah is a commandment for anyone who's qualified to be a judge. And the judge also has to recognize that when a Talmid Chacham comes to plead his case, he's bringing the truth of Hashem with him. We are not judges in the Beit Din. Not me, not you, none of us. But the truth is, we make judgments every minute. Any time we see somebody doing anything that we consider inappropriate or out of line, we make a judgment. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of this. Okay, this actually happened to one of my SEM students. She was sitting, she was sitting with other girls in sort of a semicircle. Another girl came by, and someone blocked her. She wanted to sit there, and somebody blocked her access to the seat. So what do you think she heard? What's the worst interpretation of this? What do you think? The worst possible interpretation. She's not liked. Okay, so the other girl did it purposely. The message is, don't sit with us, we don't like you. She doesn't want to sit by her, she doesn't want me, I'm not likable. Those are the messages she heard. That's what she actually heard. She was terribly hurt and insulted by this. She made a judgment, and she judged them all as guilty. Because she held them up to standards that she believes in. But is this necessarily the fact? Is that necessarily the truth? What are some other possibilities? I want everyone who wrote me an answer now to write another answer. What are other possibilities? Okay, the chair is broken, it doesn't move easily, they didn't see her, it's possible she's a little self-centered, okay, so she's saving the chair for someone else, she wasn't paying attention, they're planning a surprise, someone might have spilled something on the chair, she has low self-esteem, the chair, she's being singled out, there's something about her that was going to be discussed. Maybe even something positive. Okay, she didn't have to assume that it's because they don't like her and don't want her. That was a choice. So I'm going to give you a more extreme example of judgment, and the reason why is I want you to recognize that this judgment takes place automatically and isn't always wrong. Okay, you're visiting in Yerushalayim, and you're staying in Har Nof, the center of the world. And you take the bus to the light train. And as you get on the train, everything's great. Like nice, it's a little crowded, nice people. You get to the hotel, and you decide that you're going to visit friends in Ramat Shlomo. So you keep on, I know how to get there. I'll take the train. But instead of getting off at City Hall, as one does for the hotel, I'll take it all the way up to Givat HaMiftar, and then take the bus to Ramat Shlomo. Sounds good? Givat HaMiftar is the stop before the Arab village, Bet Chanim. So I was on that train a couple of weeks ago, and by the time I got to the stop, I was the only Jewish person on the train. And it was very uncomfortable for me. But I realized I was making a judgment. I was treating each one of these people on the train as a potential terrorist in my mind. I didn't do anything. I just got off where I needed to get off. But I made a judgment. So my judgment wasn't necessarily foolish. It would be foolish if I were to take the train onto the next stop and get off in Bet Hanina for whatever reason. That would be foolish. So we both do make judgments, and sometimes they're false, as in the example with the girl in the chair. We make judgments, and sometimes they're appropriate. They're self-protective. So the mitzvah of the tzedek teshpot amitacha is going to give us the mechanics of how. Remember, There's what and there's how. We spoke about what. We need to judge both because that's what happens instinctively and for self-protection. But if we're going to see that all the pieces fit in, and that's what Shalom is about, we have to judge righteously. So now we're going to learn how. Okay. So we're moving into halacha land, which is what life really is all about. Okay, so this mitzvah, of course, addresses our thought process. So here's another Gemara. One who suspects the innocent will suffer physical punishment. You're obligated to judge favorably where that makes sense. Okay, so now we're going to again look into this specifically. The requirement to give the benefit of the doubt is not a blanket statement applicable equally to all people in all situations. The halacha will differ depending on who's doing the act we observe. A tzaddik, a rasha, or someone in between. And to what extent the act appears to lean in the direction of innocent or guilty, zechut or chova. This is not showing favoritism. Rather, it's judging with righteousness, in accordance with the truth, according to the way the person has proven that he conducts himself in general. So I'll give you this first example. On your way to shul one morning, you notice your neighbor, Rav Shulman, a fine Talmud Chacham and Tzaddik, looking around furtively. And then he goes to another neighbor's mailbox and pulls out a newspaper. And he starts walking off with it. Now that's suspicious. Okay, so again, if you're looking at this superficially, you'll say, who would have thought Rav Shulman would steal a newspaper? So Rav Shulman falls into the halachic category of tzaddik. For such a person, the halacha is, even if you saw him clearly doing an aveira at night, do not harbor any doubts about him the next day, because he certainly would have done tshuva by then. So that means suspend your judgment. You know what happened now. Let's say he was going to take the newspaper home, read it, and put it back. You're not allowed to do that. But being a tzaddik, he will know this the same way you know this, and it almost certainly will do tshuva and not repeat this. But there's something else. What if the act was not clearly an aveira, but it leans strongly in that direction? As long as there may be some far-fetched explanation, but an explanation, that there may be positive intentions that you're unaware of, even if the possibility is remote, you're obligated to judge the tzaddik favorably. Now in our situation, what could be a possible favorable interpretation? Even though I'm not a tzaddik, I want to tell you something you may have seen me do. I get Bina magazine and I get Hamodia. My friend gets Mishpacha. When I finish my magazines, I give them to a neighbor who wants to read Bina and some parts of the Hamodia. When my friend finishes Mishpacha, she gives it to me. Sometimes she'll lay it by her door for me to pick up, where people sometimes throw mail. But I know this is last week's. This week's will be still in its plastic wrapper. Last week's, besides having a date, doesn't have plastic, so I pick it up. But let's say one of my Neve girls sees me doing this, and she doesn't know that the newspapers have plastic wrappers. All she knows is that I picked up a newspaper right near a door that says clearly Sasson, and I put it under my arm and I took it up to my house. She doesn't know that this is on purpose. So if the person is a good person, you have to assume there may be something you don't know. And quite a number of you wrote in possibilities. Okay? Now, besides, somebody asked a question which we're going to treat soon, which is how are we to decide who's a tzaddik in Russia? Okay, we don't know. There are a lot of things we don't know. Maybe the newspaper was bought jointly by both neighbors. Okay, maybe the person who took it out of the mailbox, Rav Shulman, had permission to do that. Maybe he got permission. Maybe he had permission to read it and is not comfortable with doing it when other people see. So there are a lot of possibilities here. But let's be honest for a moment. Which is the easiest possibility for most people to assume? What's the easiest one? Come on, let's hear it. Who would have believed it? Okay? So Doug says the first. Okay, now there are other possibilities. Maybe the neighbor's away and said, take my paper. But the worst is the easiest. So the negative judgment, Seamless says. Negative is easier. Okay? And we have all sorts of secret agendas there. One of it comes from our past experience with people who are not necessarily tzaddikim. Another comes from judging somebody negatively, is very comfortable. I am the judge. I am the jury. It's very comfortable. It's a comfortable place to stand. It's extremely destructive. Okay, now we're going to have another case. The wicked. Now, we didn't yet discuss how we know who's wicked and who's righteous. We're going to hear this first. Nimrod is not the kind of person you'd want to meet in a dark alley. It's a truly bad egg. His deeds are consistently negative, and his cynical attitude indicates that his Yirat Shamayim is non-existent. One day, as you stand by the bus stop, you see Nimrod saunter over and help an elderly man, carry some of his numerous packages. It's more likely that he intends to run off with the merchandise than he wants to perform a chesed, you think to yourself. Are you guilty of judging him without righteousness? So the answer is a person is a notorious rasha. I mean, he built his reputation. It didn't come from nowhere. Okay, whose deeds are more often bad than good. So this is beginning to answer your question. How do you know? Again, notorious. You're talking about deeds, not just your feelings about the person. Someone who showed themselves to be totally lacking in Yirat Shamayim. He's judged according to the model that he created. So you don't judge a random person as being a rasha. A rasha writes his own books. Okay? Now I want to point out, Alice wrote, most of our judgments stem from our own personal issue examples from our childhood. Automatically we judge from our feelings. How do we change these deep-rooted negative feelings? So the way you do it is first getting a grip on yourself and notice that you're making a judgment. Notice that you've made a judgment. Okay? And you see him doing something that appears to be a good deed. If there's any possibility his intentions are really malicious, then you should judge him negatively. And assume that he either was really doing something negative, or that his deed was done only to garner honor and did not mean well. Chazal add that if a rasha is also a mesis, which is somebody who leads other Jews astray, then you're prohibited to judge him favorably. So in this case, as Vivian pointed out, since this is somebody who wrote his own book, and the name of his book is Rasha, you should help the victim. So the idea there is by judging a rasha favorably, who are you harming? All of his potential victims. You should go there and tell the elderly person, hey, wait a minute, you don't even know this guy. You know what? I'll help you with your packages. Okay, now we have the third category. Mr. Average. Most people do not fall into either of these categories. They may not be exemplary tzaddikim, but on the other hand, they certainly do not qualify as notorious rishayim. The average person who tries to avoid Averis but sometimes slips up is to be judged in accordance with the following guidelines. Now, you have to hear this very clearly because the vast majority of people are average. That's what average means. Okay. If the action in question leans towards a positive interpretation, or if both sides seem about equal, You're obligated to judge the person favorably and give him the benefit of the doubt. So again, let's repeat this. That if the act looks favorable, or 50-50, maybe it's favorable, maybe it's not. Your obligation is to make a favorable judgment. Did I say a nice thing to do? No, I said Torah obligation. Okay, now let's say that's not what it is. Let's say if the action seems more likely to be negative, but not definitely so. So you have to conscientiously then suspend judgment. And here are the words we don't like to use. You ready for those words? I don't know. I don't know what really happened here. Okay? And you leave the matter in doubt. However, it's called a midah chasidus, a pious and good thing, to make an effort to go beyond the letter of the law and to judge favorably. That's how you have to judge them. There's another category. The other category is a stranger. The rules above would apply in regard to someone you know. But what about someone you never met and he's doing a questionable act? If you don't know the person and the nature of the deed is unclear, then min haTorah there is no obligation to judge him favorably. Here too, it would be an act of piety to do so. So when the Torah allows us to protect our legitimate interests, so again, you have to, these are the words of Chazal, respect him and suspect him. Treat the person cordially, but exercise caution. Even so, a person should not give verbal expression to suspicions, but keep them to himself. So, for instance, if you saw a stranger taking Mrs. Sasson's paper, let's say I was the person who saw it, I'd go upstairs to my apartment, I would dial Mrs. Sasson's phone and say, is someone supposed to take your magazine? I would look into it. Here's his example. Yankee was outside riding his new bike when a boy he did not recognize from the neighborhood stopped him and said, can I ever turn on your bike? I'll just take a 10-minute spin and then bring it right back. Yankee hesitated, but he was generous by nature, and the boy looked okay. But finally Yankee said, sorry, I have to be home in a few minutes. I can't lend the bike now. Now, Yankee didn't say, Russia! Okay, he didn't do that. Thief. But he was cautious. And he spoke to him respectfully. And this is why he even stretched the truth, which is permitted in this situation, said, I have to be home. Maybe he didn't have to be home. But that's a lot more respectful than saying, I don't want to lend my bike to a stranger. Okay, he maintained his distance. Even in a case when someone we do know and would ordinarily be obligated to judge favorably, if the situation is one in which the doubtful action might lead to harm or damage to oneself or others, the halacha permits us to be suspicious enough to protect ourselves. Okay, you have it all in your heads? This is all clear? Okay, so I'm going to try to show you his chart. I'm not sure if I'll be successful in doing it if you see it, but if not, I'll write it up. Oops, no. Am I doing this right? No, I'm doing it wrong. Why am I not getting this? Here it is, but it's mirror writing for you. No, it's not. One minute, I'm going to try to give it to you. Bear with me. What? No. Here. Do you see it? Okay, so here's the person. We've divided people into good, doubtful, and bad. Okay? Rather the circumstances. It's good, doubtful, and bad. We have tzaddik, we have rasha, we have average, and we have stranger. I'm going to read you the chart now, and I will send it as an email. Okay, the person appears to be good. The action, rather, appears good. So the tzaddik, he did a good action, judge him favorably. A rasha, he did a good action, seemingly. Judge him unfavorably. Be suspicious. An average person, judge him favorably. A stranger, you don't have to judge him favorably, but it's a midas chasidus to do so. That's if the deed appears good. If the deed appears doubtful, the tzaddik does it, you judge favorably. A rasha does a doubtful deed, judge unfavorably. An average person, you have to judge favorably if it's only doubtful. Okay, a stranger, again, a midah chasidus, judge him favorably. A bad deed, a tzaddik, you still have to judge favorably. A rasha, you have to judge unfavorably. An average person, min haTorah, leave in doubt. It's a midas chasidus to judge favorably, but leave it in doubt. Don't make a decision. Notice that you're judging, and use those words, I don't know. So I was speaking to my friend today, and she once worked for Rebbetzin Sarna. She was her personal secretary, and she was the Rebbetzin of Hebron Yeshiva, a remarkable, remarkable person. So one of the traits, although I know her very slightly, but I noticed almost immediately, is she loved, finds like she would see the goodness in people and bring it forth. So like, how is this one doing? He's so remarkable. He's, whatever. So she was very instrumental in running the yeshiva. So of course, when you're in that kind of position, every so often things happen that are not as you would like them to be. Financial doing, the supplier overcharge, whatever it is. How did she treat it? She would lean back and say, well, that leaves us with a question mark, doesn't it? And she never said more than that. She would do whatever she had to do, but she was just like, well, that leaves us with a question mark. And the closest she ever came to venting was that she said to my friend, boy, that's going to join all of the other question marks I have in my closet. Okay, so that's the basic law. So before we go further, I want to stress, it's a law. I mean, you cannot achieve a connective relationship without this. Okay, it's some of your questions. Okay, so go back to your bus trip, and being the only one that was Jewish. Can you suspect the ones left on the bus were not from the best of people? Why is it we often like to conclusively decide and judge rather than leaving it as a maybe? I always open the door for strangers collecting at my door, even when alone with the kids. I give and close the door, but my friend never opens the door unless her husband is home. What's the proper way? So again, you're allowed, even in the case of an average person, to say, I don't know, but to be self-protective. Now, especially when these were strangers and non-Jews, I have no obligation to judge them favorably. My obligation is to assume the best, but to be self-protective. That's what's appropriate. So, about opening the door for collectors. So I would be hypocritical if I were to say that I don't open the door. I do open the door, even when I'm alone in the house. And I usually invite them in if it seems reasonable to do so, if they're older or look like they might want to drink or something. But I live in Har Nof. What would I do if I lived in Manhattan? I probably wouldn't open the door. So everything depends on the realities of the situation at hand. But this is what I do. And I know that there are people who feel differently. Okay, how do we treat or express our expectations? I don't know what you mean by expectations, and I think you have to be clearer, please. Well, be a little bit clearer. I don't know what you mean. Okay, so the next thing, when you know halacha, is to know who is obligated. Who is obligated to judge favorably? The obligation to judge favorably is incumbent on every Jew, man or woman at all times, in respect to every Jew, man, woman, child, adult, again, excluding the Rishayim, excluding non-Jews. Although there's no Torah commandment not to suspect a non-Jew, nevertheless, it's neither ethical nor healthy to assume that all non-Jews are suspicious. It's not healthy to be suspicious of people. Only when there's good reason to hate someone would it be permitted to judge them totally unfavorably, as we spoke about with Rishayim. But even then, it should be in a controlled and intellectual manner, not an exaggerated, blind, emotional hatred. Certainly, one must be careful never to make a chillul Hashem, especially when community relations are at stake, and animosity should result. One should strive consistently to maintain peaceful relationships with everyone and live with harmony with all. Extra care should be taken with one's relationships with people of power. Why? Because your negativity to them will be mirrored. There's a verse in Mishnah that is Kamayim Panim El Panim. One face is reflected in the water by the other. So what that means is that you have to expect that if you treat people suspiciously, they will see you suspiciously. Treat them negatively, they may be negative towards you, which in the case of a Russia would happen anyway. So with people in power, since there's a bill to pay for their being suspicious or negative, you have to be especially careful, like politicians, one's boss, one's neighbors, or business partners, in your interactions. Now, somebody just wrote in, are you saying that the phrase, love your neighbor as yourself, is just towards Jews? Okay, that would be true, but we're not talking about loving your neighbor. We're talking about what? We're talking judging favorably, judging righteously. So as we said, with the non-Jew, you have to be able to step back and judge in accordance with the situation. Okay? This means when your mother-in-law sends over soup, are you ready? Every week, over your protests, you should not interpret it to mean that she's criticizing your cooking. You should evaluate her action as a selfless act of chesed. That's the best possible interpretation. And we assume that your mother-in-law isn't a Russia. Okay? Okay. When the neighbor passes by for the third time without responding to your hello, you may not judge him to be a snob. You should assume he's preoccupied. He has something on his mind. And in fact, you might even ask him if he needs some help. Okay? Somebody wrote, wait, if someone is not a Russia, but you've had a bad experience with them, what's the option? Is a school bully. What, for instance, a school bully? Okay? So, if your experience with them has given you reason to be suspicious of, and again, we spoke about, remember earlier we said, there are situations where you could judge an average person favorably. That's what comes easily. In the case of a school bully, that is not the case. There are other situations where it's 50-50. You could judge favorably or not. Now, if that's the reality, if the act of bullying only happened once or twice, maybe you should judge them favorably. But if it's not 50-50, if you've had numerous negative interactions with them, then you're not obligated to go into denial of reality. Okay, that's clear? Okay, if a fact is hard not to gain a negative reaction to, I assume means have a reaction, cannot judging be achieved through trying to see the other as a valid, valuable other, whose internal world and life and goals we don't know? How do we express our expectations without being judgmental? Yes, a mistake that people make is they think, oh, judging favorably means being naive. No. Judging negatively and instinctively without thought is being naive. Judging favorably means that you have to do what you just said. You have to know the person's internal world before you make a negative judgment. Okay. Children should be trained in this mitzvah from an early age. How do we train them to do a mitzvah that's performed essentially with one's mind? And children are not deep thinkers. Think out loud when you're with your kids. Okay, it says, well, it looks like that boy just pushed ahead to get to the bus before the other boys. But then I noticed it was his little brother who got separated from him, and he had to go quickly to look after his brother. So let the child hear your narrative. Another thing you could do is to describe imaginary situations to help the child practice using favorable judgment. So kids love imaginary stories, as you know. And if you can make the stories about far-out characters, you know, Donna who came from Mars, or animals, so it creates a little emotional distance, and they're not afraid to identify with the characters then. We're not talking about Menachem and Miriam, we're talking about Puff, the cat. So if you could talk about how Puff the cat thought that all of the other cats didn't love her because they didn't play with her, and then they saw that all of the other cats were making her a surprise birthday party in Catland. Okay, that's good for her to hear. And the stories, little children are not literary critics. The stories don't have to be perfect, and it's a very healthy thing to do. So teaching judging favorably by stories is very good, and teaching empathy by stories is also very good. Okay, also maybe treat the kids themselves without too much judgment based on fears, anxiety about what their actions mean about them. That's right. Of course you should judge your kids favorably, which means if it's likely to be a good thing, then judge it as good. If it's 50-50 and it makes sense, judge it as good. If it's not 50-50, remember, you have obligations to raise your kids well. Don't be naive. Okay, your kids are not Mr. Shulman the Tzaddik. Okay, next thing. Rebuke remains an obligation. The Chafetz Chaim points out that even when we're obligated to give a person the benefit of the doubt, this does not excuse us from our obligation to rebuke a person who has acted in a questionable way when circumstances require it. For instance, you see your child running through the flower patch on his way to the school bus. Now you could assume he wasn't trying to cause damage. He just wasn't thinking. He was oblivious. But you have to tell him, even though you're not judging him as an evil person, you assume he didn't want to do any harm. Next time, be careful. You have to tell him that because he doesn't know, even though his intentions were good, and that's why you're judging him favorably, his act was damaging to someone. If it's necessary to investigate what really happened for the purpose of carrying out the mitzvah of soft-spoken rebuke effectively, we should do so. However, it's unclear whether this obligation applies to anyone other than close family. Next thing, you ready? Hold on to your chairs. This is going to be a hard one. Suppose you're wrong. Daniel saw Yisrael pulling a paper from his pocket during the math test and immediately assumed he was cheating without giving him the benefit of the doubt. Later, word got out that Yisrael had indeed been punished by the teacher for cheating on the test. Daniel felt vindicated. Had his suspicions been justified or had they? So if you judge somebody negatively, in a case where halacha would require us to judge him favorably, even if it turns out he was wrong, he was guilty, you're also guilty. That means you are not the teacher, you are not the proctor. You should have been able to say, well, doesn't look good, but 50-50, maybe he was just pulling out a tissue or something. I don't know. I don't know. Okay? And the opposite is also true. If you judge someone favorably as required, and the truth emerges later that we find out the person was really guilty, you still did the mitzvah of judging them favorably. You're still okay in Hashem's book. You are still trying to put that piece in the right place. No one likes being erroneously suspected of wrongdoing. But Chazal revealed to us that the extreme discomfort of such a situation may be worthwhile, since the victim will be well rewarded. So it says, let my portion be with those who are suspected of something they have not done. So that, why am I telling you this? Let's say someone did this wrong. They should have judged you favorably, but they didn't. You're not a Russia. And the situation may have been even better than 50-50, and they still judged you wrong. So realize that Hashem will reward you for your forbearance. Okay? So if you're the victim of being suspected, okay, you're obligated to conciliate with the person, and even go a step further by giving him a blessing. Now, if you did this to someone else, you have to go out of your way to make it up to them. Okay? Now, if it was only in your mind, but the person doesn't know about it, even if you said it, don't ask him forgiveness. Why? Because it'll make the whole situation worse. So telling somebody, I thought you were cheating on the test because you're the kind of person who might be cheating, because you're like not a tzaddik. And then it turned out to be a tissue, so I'm so sorry I misjudged you. This is not a good idea. Do not go there. Okay, okay, here's some questions, some things that came in. Okay, okay. Also, maybe treat the kids themselves without too much judgment. Oh, we read this already. Okay, it just moved on the screen, I'm sorry. Okay, last thing, actually, the next to last thing. Keep your display window clean. Here's his example. Mr. Schwartz stopped by the grocery store every morning while davening, took a loaf of bread from the box outside without paying, and rushed home. Actually, every Rosh Chodesh he would pay for all the loaves from that month, and it saved him waiting online. But Shimon didn't know about that arrangement, and each time he saw Mr. Schwartz walk off with the bread, he had to make a real effort to say, I don't know, it looks funny. He had to make a real effort. Okay, so now we have another question. Was Mr. Schwartz right? Okay, was he right in acting in a suspicious manner? So the person who's doing an act in public has an obligation of his own to avoid doing things that will arouse suspicion. You have to see that you look blameless. You have to see that you are setting a positive example. Okay, so we actually have a situation like this in our neighborhood. The minion factory in Har Nof is called Imre Shefer, and a man started a business putting out a big box with bread, and you're supposed to pay 10 shekels. Put it in the tzedakah push over there. It's not for tzedakah, it's for the bread. He made that clear. Sometimes he's there, sometimes he's not. So at the beginning, people sometimes would take the bread, and then the next, maybe they didn't have a coin with them that day, a 10 shekel coin. Maybe they only had a bill, or there wasn't enough money in the box. So sometimes they paid him like a few days later, until he put up a sign, only take bread if you pay for it today. And the reason for this is twofold. One is some people forgot to pay him. But the other is it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for people to just walk off with merchandise and not pay. It doesn't create harmony and doesn't make the world work like it should. Okay, so in general, okay, it's not a good idea even to justify yourself. But if you feel that people saw you do something and they made a judgment of it being wrong, if you don't justify yourself to them, you could be lowering their standards. So you would have to be able to say, oh, this looked like this, but it really was that, so that people don't create a whole new normal. Okay, somebody just wrote an insightful thing, okay, which is that this idea of going above and beyond yourself and looking at what people will feel is very important. So here's our last paragraph. Judge my children favorably. Remember the uncomfortable incident at the judge's bench at the beginning of our shir? Okay, now suppose you responded differently to the person who stepped on your foot. Suppose you would have said, that's all right, I'm sure you're rushing to get somewhere, I'm sure you didn't mean to cause harm, it could happen to anyone. Then his father, the judge, would have given you a much warmer welcome. There are times when we have no choice but to publicly denigrate someone who's violating the Torah for the constructive purpose of warning others against such behavior, or to cause the sinner to regret his ways, as in the case of the man who was selling non-kosher food for kosher. Okay, still we should take care not to denigrate these wrongdoers in our tefillah. because Hashem, like every father, loves those who speak in the defense of his children. So this is our last thing. And now we're going to summarize the entire lesson. So bear with me, this is the most important part. The mitzvah of judging with righteousness obliges us to judge questionable acts of others favorably, meaning questionable, okay, 50-50, in keeping with the guidelines of halacha, which takes into consideration the person in question, the circumstances, and the risk of damage. Again, summarize. You judge favorably depending on the person, tzaddik, rasha, ordinary person, stranger. The circumstances, looks good, 50-50, looks bad, okay, and the risk, especially with strangers. At the same time, we should conduct ourselves in a way which will not make other people suspicious of us. Okay, have a good night.